Hello to everyone. Welcome to our IHRM webinar. As many of you know already, this event is a part of IHRM Webinar Series organized by the team that you will see on the photo just in a second. The photo was taken a few weeks ago at the Global IHRM. Marcus, can you show the photo? At the IHRM conference in New York, and the whole team was there. So you see from the left on the right, Elaine Farndale, Maya Vidovic, Mila Lazarova, myself, Miguel Olives, and Marion Festing. And of course, we have also a very precious help from Caroline Adrian from the Center for International HR Studies, Penn State, Gerardo Arteaga, and Christine Barnett from Simon Fraser, University of Canada. So previous events of the IHRM Webinar Series are available online, and it's very nice at our YouTube channel. You're very, very welcome to watch them, and we have a pretty good number of views on them. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Marcus Pudelka. Marcus, thank you very much again for accepting this invitation. So Professor Marcus Pudelka is Director of the Department of International Business at Tübingen University School of Business and Economics. He earned master degrees in different countries and business studies at University of Cologne in Germany, economics at Sorbonne University in Paris in France, and international management with SEMS, and a PhD from University of Cologne. Before joining Tübingen University, he worked for 8 years for the University of Edinburgh Business School. And for long-term research purposes, he visits very frequently other universities, and the list is very, very long, so I'm not going to enumerate all of them. Columbia University, Doshisha University, Dubai University, ESCP as well, ESA, etc. So you can see the full list in his bio. And his current research focuses on headquarters-subsidiary relationships, multinational individuals and teams, the impact of language on international business, trust, international IHRM, Chinese and Japanese management, and cross-cultural management. And he had published on all these topics and book chapters, and very prestigious journals such as Academy of Management Journal, Human Resource Management, Journal of International Business Studies, etc. He has received several research awards, among others from the Academy of Management and the Academy of International Business. So now it is with great pleasure that I pass the floor to Marcus, who will discuss the question of how IHRM can regain the scholarly high ground. Very interesting. So enjoy.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and let me also add my thanks to you and your colleagues for actually organizing this webinar. Before I actually was now involved in the preparation of this webinar, I had no clue how work intensive that actually is. So I think the entire community owes you really a lot of gratitude for your service to our community. Of course, when preparing this webinar, I looked at previous speakers, and I've seen a long list of highly reputed, worldwide reputed scholars. So I'm very humbled to add my name to that list. And when looking also at the topics that colleagues spoke about, I noticed that most of them were talking about a, let's say, confined, specialized area where they have particular expertise about. And I decided now to follow more a few other colleagues who decided to speak about a broader topic, and I will do so as well, even though that might mean that I speak with, let's say, less competence about this general topic as if I had chosen one where I do my own research about. But this is, I chose a topic that I do think a lot about, and my hope is that this will be also of some relevance to those who attend now. I might be somewhat also different to my previous colleagues speaking, because I probably speak with less exclamation marks and more with question marks. But I do hope again that also the questions and even the doubts that I want to express will be also of some relevance to you and resonate to you. So the topic that I have chosen for this talk is the following: is international human resource management under the resource-based view too relevant to be left to international human resource management scholars? So how IHRM can now regain the scholarly high ground? That is the question that I wanted to pose. So to start out, let me talk about some shifts that I would argue took place around the 1980s, 1990s, so already a long time ago. And I apologize for drawing now or depicting quite so a picture with quite a broad brush, so certainly not much nuance here. But I would argue that we could observe a shift taking place from industry and brand positioning to the resource-based view, from an external to an internal view, and from microeconomics and marketing to human resources. So let me briefly explain a bit closer what I mean with this. So if we take again the 1980s, I would argue that this time strategy was very much dominated by industry positioning, and here we can take Porter's famous 5 forces exemplary. So the idea was that a company's performance depends very much on the degree of competitiveness of an entire industry. So, and therefore, the most relevant decision of corporate strategy is or was to position the company in the right industry, as it can be characterized by these 5 forces by Porter. And if we break this now down and go from this macro level more onto a micro level, we could also argue that from this industry positioning follows brand and product positioning. So positioning referring here to the place that a brand or a product occupies in the minds of the customers and how it is distinguished from the products of the competitors. So that now leads us to, again, for Porter's also famous 3 generic strategies of cost leadership, differentiation, and focus. We all know about that. So we see positioning, so with an external focus, emphasizing microeconomics and marketing. Now, while this positioning approach helped us greatly to understand why one industry was more profitable than another, it did not help us very much to understand why certain companies within an industry were more profitable than other companies. So here, this resource-based view kicked in, I would argue, in the 1990s, possibly, I mean, we are talking about 30 years ago, but possibly even the last grand theory that we experienced in management, arguably. And so here now the perspective shifted, and sustainable competitive advantage was understood to derive from developing superior resources and capabilities. So in opposition now to what we have just heard about positioning. And then organizations must develop, therefore, firm-specific core competencies that will allow them to outperform competitors by doing things differently. So why am I talking about that? This is all stuff that we all know about, but I come closer now to our topic of human relations, because this resource-based view has now very much more an internal focus, as it is concentrating on the organization's internal resources as a means to obtain a competitive advantage. And arguably the organization's most important resources to create competitive advantage are now human resources. And that brings us now to the closer interrelationship in the resource-based view between strategy and HRM. So we observed shifts going from the industry and brand positioning to the resource-based view, from an external to an internal view, and importantly, from microeconomics and marketing to human resources. So with this introduction, we can now ask ourselves the following question. Given now this focus of the resource-based view on internal resources, in particular human resources, we might conclude that this should imply golden times for human resource management. So, has that taken place? Now, before I address the answer to that question, let me add one additional consideration. I would argue that since the 1990s, we have observed clearly one mega trend that mattered greatly in our research, and that is globalization. Sustainability and digitization coming later on as well. So, in order to now illustrate the relevance, not just of human resources, but then also this in an international context, let me read out to you a quote that I found from Evans and Collins colleagues already exactly 20 years ago. So they argued, in a global era, the most relevant insights into management processes will come from studying human resource management in international context. So let me therefore now come back to my original question, and let me also modify that slightly. So again, with the resource-based view and its internal focus on human resource management, plus now the globalization, would that not now imply golden times for international human resource management? And I would now argue that one could say, unfortunately, that was not the case. And I would suggest that the reason might be the following. So possibly international human resource management under the resource-based view appears to be too relevant to be left only to IHRM scholars. So I would argue what happened was not so much that human resource management became now so much of relevance in management scholarship as such, but I would argue it was more strategy that adopted a people's perspective. So it was understood in strategy that the top-down model of management cannot cope anymore with the global pressures to be better, cheaper, and faster. So it was all more about self-control, being now perceived to be more efficient than boss control. And self-control is essentially implemented via the inclusion of HRM aspects into strategy. And if we look at here these tremendously relevant and important strategy scholars of the last decades, all of them, actually, these strategy scholars had in microeconomics background, but all of them also understood the relevance of the human resource the human resources, and therefore shifted their focus towards the management. And that led to a strategic importance of international human resource management. So with the growing number of cross-border mergers, acquisitions, green fields, this area, international human resource management, has become truly of strategic importance. So before, this area was maybe seen as merely a task to get strategy executed, but the concept of the transnational company reinforced the concept of the global integration of strategy and international human resource management. So as a result, the boundaries between, on one side, strategy and HRM, and on the other side, between the HR function and line management, become fuzzier and fuzzier. So what is now HRM, at least in the classic understanding? We see here a series of different functions that are of relevance with regards to HRM, so planning, recruitment, training, appraisal, compensation, support. We all know this. And if we ask now the question, what is classic international human resource management about? Well, the same things, more or less, but now focused on the expatriates. So with the view back, we can certainly state that international human resource management has been almost obsessed by the study of expatriates, and this in the context of the multinational corporation. If we now look at what contemporary international human resource management is all about, we see, first of all, a much broader area of actors. So not just the expatriates, but also impatriates, third country nationals, locals, self-initiated expatriates, short-term expatriates, travelers, multiculturals, multilinguals, migrants, and the list might go on. And the aim for activities, also here we see a much more broader scope, so not just the mere IHRM functions, all aspects that relate now very much also to strategy, for example, such as global leadership development, global talent management, cultural due diligence, headquarter subsidiary relations, transfer control, integration activities, and the list might go on. So to bring things together, what is now contemporary international human resource management about? Well, it is about, and it is about more activities, but still mostly there is a focus on international assignees of multinational corporations. There is almost an obsession with theory generation in management studies. So most international human resource management, as human resource management, as management studies in general, is deductive. That means it is built around hypothesis testing. Nevertheless, I would argue that for these top management journals, there is almost not just almost, there is this requirement that we need to develop theory. And I would argue that this is now leading us to a certain paradoxical situation. Even though we are now in the business of testing in deductive research, we always have to end up our articles with new theories, so the development of new theory, but that subsequently is never going to be, or hardly ever going to be, tested. So we are perceiving here that almost for every study that we write, we are faced with a theoretical contribution. And that results from the necessity in our area to develop theory. I would argue now the implementation of theories, and hence also simply incremental knowledge advancement. So therefore, what I would argue, we need more implementation of theories going on, that we need to bring things back together and integrate things. So integrating theories to focus more on substantive theory building would be one aspect. But of course, if you say that to focus on the big theories, I mean, that is like cheap advice. But I would argue that at the same time, we should allow for also descriptive research in our area and also in top journals. After all, what we observe in management, this requirement to constantly generate new theory in our output, is not necessary in other disciplines such as marketing, finance, accounting, economics. So there one can also simply write about phenomena and describe them if they are of relevance. So under the publication pressure and the pressure to, as I mentioned, in general in management, the pressure to generate out of every study new theory, we do a lot of incremental work. Often we see articles that might be well executed, so no reviewer really could complain about the rigor, about the way how the paper was written. But sometimes we wonder, well, did we really need to read that? Did we really learn something from that? So therefore, I would call for a greater focus on more deep theorizing on one side, but also alternatively to let us appreciate more pure description of what could be fantastic or fascinating phenomena. if we look at reality on one side and the research agendas that we have, I would say that in particular now we are really confronted with transformational and disruptive new realities and phenomena happening around us. But on the other side, there is still a focus on rather traditional research agendas, with more the agenda of increasing our incremental knowledge. And I put there rather polemically, I admit, the sentence, we found a new moderator to the mediator of the moderators, and so on. So therefore, I would argue that research is often detached from realities. And as a result, we often write about topics that we consider to be of relevance. But this is the case possibly for just a self-contained audience with little contact outside of our bubble. And if we extend that perspective not just to the research agendas, but also to research methods, I would argue that new realities, new phenomena require mainly, first of all, exploration. But there's still this focus on hypothesis testing with these, I would argue, incremental contributions. So exploration, in contrast, requires, in my view, breaking out of these disciplinary content and method-specific silos that we often find ourselves. It requires more creativity, more interdisciplinary work, more inductive studies. I was just last week a member of a PhD committee in at my university in economics, history of economics, and the PhD candidate wrote about economic development in Africa and broke this down to 500 micro-regions in sub-Saharan Africa. And in order to measure now economic development, this PhD candidate looked at satellite pictures at night and correlated wherever electric light was on at night with economic development. I found that a bold approach. I found that creative, and I would wish that in our area we would see more of these interesting leaps that I could observe there. And what about the eternal topic of grand challenges? So globalization, sustainability, digitization, I mentioned already. After all, our area is phenomena driven. So let us look at new phenomena. Let us describe them, and let us describe them even though we might not have yet a theory around them. Let us look at problems. Often we read papers and we come up with new theories, we read about these theories, but what are actually the problems being solved here? I would like to see all the times more relevance towards practice and policy. I mean, we all have in our papers the section of practical implications, and I think we all agree that this is, if you take the entire article, the least relevant section. And I would argue what we need is to look at being of relevance to a wider audience. So what do I mean by a wider audience? I would make the point that business studies research is perceived by, let's say, a wider audience less than economics research. We read about interest rates and so on all the time. Business studies research is not that much on the agenda. And if we look at business studies, probably management is again less in the focus than, let's say, finance or marketing. If we break this down further, look at only management research, probably HRM is featuring less in news or so than strategy. And if we break this further down, human resource management is probably more popular than the area of international human resource management, even though we have seen how important globalization actually is. So for questions on the macro level in economics, so again, interest rates, financial policy, and the like. So, of course, we look at answers coming from macroeconomics, obviously. But if we now look at questions about the human side of management, we could expect also prominence of human resource management research or findings from our area. But probably in the news or in the media, we see more about outcomes from behavioral economics. So is our research to some extent not as relevant to outside, to the area outside of our own area? And that leads me to the question about the relevance or our relevance for bigger societal debates. So who contributes to these important societal debates? So there are quite a list of social scientists, like sociologists, historians, political scientists, economists, philosophers, anthropologists, even linguists, but, and that is my point, probably much less so management scholars, and that would include also our subdiscipline. I try to depict that with this slide here. So here you see these various areas of sociology and history and so on, so social scientists. And what I try to depict here is how much they are interacting, communicating, and maybe we are talking a bit with economists, but otherwise we are very much in our own bubble. That would be my argument. Of course, this is a very stereotypical presentation and gives not room enough for important exceptions, but I would argue that this is the overall picture. And if we aggregate now all these different disciplines within social science, then we see that there is maybe a conversation going on in order to discuss these major societal debates between social scientists, between artists, intellectuals, journalists, but we management scholars are, again, I would say, rather at the outside of these debates. So where are these societal major debates taking place? So in prestigious journals like Science, like Nature, but also in newspapers, big ones, New York Times, Guardian, Le Monde, Die Zeit as examples, maybe debates on TV, of course, books. But I would argue we might look at them as interested observers, but probably we usually don't find these major societal debates to be of relevance really for our own research. And therefore, we are not directly informed by these debates, and therefore they don't really inform our research. And then the other way around, I would argue that we bring very little back to those debates. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that we should forget about our journals and all right now about in newspapers. So that's not my point at all. But I would still argue that we should look more to these debates, bring them into our debates, discuss them in our journals among ourselves, and then also from time to time bring our results back into these more broader societal debates. And that, I would argue, we are still not doing as well as other disciplines or colleagues in other disciplines do. So therefore, I would argue that we need to contribute to intellectual debates taking place elsewhere, and to base our research also on intellectual debates taking place elsewhere. And again, bringing our results back. That leads us to this obvious and much discussed opposition, possibly between rigor and relevance, to which I would also add responsibility. social responsibility, environmental responsibility. Of course, if you ask editors, they will all tell you, yes, we search, we look for the maximum of rigor and at the same time the maximum of relevance, and there is no opposition between these two poles. They can be both very high, but I would dispute that to some extent. Of course, I'm not at all saying it would be foolish to say that they would be mutually exclusive or so. But I wonder if there is not somewhat of an excessive rigor or demands for rigor. To give you an example, maybe one publication I should be proudest of, if we just look at ranking of the journal. And of course, yes, I am proud, I admit to that. But you know, ask me what that paper was actually about, so my supposedly best paper of all, I honestly have to say that even in this moment, I couldn't really tell you anymore. And why is that the case? Because I hardly feel that I had still ownership of what we actually produced. So we are sorry, and our story was changed so much by the reviewers that with a claim that our qualitative paper, this message or that message that we put forward was not rigorously explained, and therefore we had to cut this, and it was not necessarily what we meant to bring across. And therefore I argue excessive need to be rigorous, and I wouldn't have said that what we did was actually not rigorous, but in any case, this rigor led to, I would argue, excessive, or can lead often to excessive incrementalism. So what is the underlying reason of that situation? And I would see a major aspect here in the incentive system of our publication system. So we are not, if we meet each other at conferences, necessarily talking about what we wrote about. We talk more about where we are publishing. So it's this extreme focus on the A+ publications, the A publications. We all want to get into those publications, and of course, I'm certainly part of that. I strive also to be in that. So I'm not trying here to put myself outside this this urge to be part of that group. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know any other discipline that is so much fixated on these journal rankings. For the last 2 years, I was heading also the international business discipline in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So there's an association of business studies professors. I was part of the leadership of that association. And for the last 2 years, we were fighting like mad about the new German publication ranking, and we agreed not to be able to agree, and we will not come up with a unified journal ranking in Germany. So it was so highly politicized. And is that really, I wonder, the main point of our academic work to focus on these journal rankings so much? I would argue that leads to highly standardized approaches. So it is almost like as if we scholars are in a tribe and we get these initiation rights that explain us how to publish in a paper, in a journal. And I mean, imagine highly creative, great, inspiring research by a scholar who doesn't know how to publish in specific journals. I think this person would have no chance. And there, I think we go somewhere wrong. So our incentive systems drive us really to do research that matters to us, but that does not necessarily have an impact to a wider audience. So which questions are we asking in our research? And possibly we are not asking questions primarily based on what we could actually potentially learn from answering these questions, but we focus more on asking those questions where we already know that answers are easily to obtain. So we ask questions where we know that we have data access. Big data makes it much more easy to gain information, and then we ask questions around that, or we ask questions where we know that our answers will fit to convenient or even publishable boxes. For me, a prime example is a key concept in international work, cultural distance. So it is so easy to bring out some numbers of Hofstede scores, plug it into plug it into the Kogut-Singh formula, and then make big theories around the results that we obtain. And the results could therefore be excessive quantification on the basis of overly simplified concepts and rather incremental knowledge advancement. And therefore, I would plead for more out-of-the-box approaches. So we need to, I would argue, to re-engage more with relevant phenomena and explain them, and this not just to our community, but again to a wider audience. And that requires, I mentioned that before, more innovative and creative approaches. But those approaches can be also quite messy. They are not fitting always into these boxes that we need to observe in order to get our papers published. So this richness of phenomena that should matter and should be more in the focus, I would argue, don't always fit in disciplinary, content-related, and methodological boxes. Now, I would say a certain danger, and that is to look back at past research, past scholarship, past academic customs, and now see where we stand and to argue how much better the current situation is now. But we should also consider that in certain time from now, things might change again, and what we are currently doing and what we are so proud of in the moment might be regarded as outdated. And I wonder if we are not often going like in pendulum swings. So possibly a couple of decades ago, management scholarship was much about scholars being experts. So they could engage in broader debates with, let's say, the real world in a meaningful way, but we're not generating new scholarship in a rigorous way. Now, by contrast, management scholars are incentivized to be more researchers, publishing in a narrow area in top journals, but I would argue they got detached from the real world and from the more meaningful debates. So I wonder, is the pendulum swinging back in the opposite direction again? Not to the extent, of course, that we would give up now our rigorous research published in top journals based on journal rankings, but that we get to a situation where scholarship is going to be understood in a more multi-dimensional way of how we assess scholarly excellence. And if I look at how much time I spent on looking at journals and citing journals and how much I look at books, I'm not that interested in writing books. I am looking not that much at books. I'm looking at journals. But if I pause and think where my main inspirations actually came from, that was probably more from the rare situations where I was actually also looking at books. Yeah? And again, the question of societal debates in a more broader way. Are they becoming more relevant to us? Yeah? And I would argue that there are changes going on, in particular now with the top journals, and I applaud that new trend. So we are becoming more open and diverse to the grand debates, to new realities. We are more open with regards to the disciplines we include, the new content, new methods, and the editors are really, I would argue, more open. It's the reviewers that often constrain us, and this was not rigorous enough, reviewers not wanting to make any mistakes. We all talk about interdisciplinary work that we want to see published. But as an editor, just recently to publications or to submissions with artificial intelligence approaches, and I had no clue about that. And I was also really trying hard to get artificial intelligence scholars involved in the reviewing, and I wrote them and I talked about interdisciplinary research and how important it is to break out of our silos, and if they could just look at the method section and let me know if that was helpful or not. But I never got really responses. And we need, I think, to be more helpful across disciplinary boundaries. Sorry. So, but I do applaud more special issues on smaller and more innovative topics, more opinion pieces, invited commentaries, point-counterpoint debates. I think that is all breaking up our research in ways that I see very much positive. But there is still resistance to such change. I would say that in particular, senior scholars find it oftentimes hard to acknowledge that what they did so successfully over the past decades might become regarded as outdated. So they wish to stick to what they know, remain on their trodden paths, and continue doing what they're good at. And change is coming probably more from junior scholars, wanting to change the world or at least explain the world. But on the other side, if again, as an editor, I see such contributions, they often lack the expertise in terms also of academic rigor and writing craftsmanship. So what I would like to see is really coming together, joining of forces, the experience of senior scholars with the impetus of junior scholars. So what do we stand for? I think it's never too late to ask ourselves what we stand for in our own research. I was recently asked by a journal that had the 50th anniversary to write about my own research. And first I was not really sure if I should do that, if I should invest the time. But then I did, and I found that a truly important activity for myself to actually ask myself the question, what do I stand for in my research? Because after all, if we don't want on our tombstone just the date of our birth and of our death, plus now a list A plus how many journals A, this much. No, what do we stand for? And I think we should ask ourselves that question. For me, the answer was actually context. And I think we should go out more and talk to those that really change the world. And instead of exclusively basing our insights on those ticks that managers make between the items of a Likert scale, we provide them in a questionnaire that we created based on our hypotheses, that we formulated based on the literature that we read. So let's give more voice to those who are actually doing the changes that we observe. New phenomena, so in particular, new phenomena need to be discovered first before they can be quantified. And so therefore, we discover through curiosity, engagement on the ground, creative approaches, phenomena-driven methods, and openness towards what we might find. So therefore, now to conclude, I would argue that our publication system is in need of reform, partially even maybe revolution. If I again think about this almost exclusive relevance of these journal rankings. But of course, I mean, we don't need to act like Don Quixote. We should not go against the system individually as doctoral students. you need to obtain your PhD. As junior scholars, you need to get tenure. As senior scholars, well, you wish to continue to get recognition from your peers, but nevertheless, along the way, I would argue, let us try to do truly meaningful research and also assist others, particularly more junior scholars, in doing so. Only yesterday, I was taking part in a PhD defense at ESCP Business School in Barcelona virtually. And there was a brilliant PhD student giving her defense. And it was just a celebration of daring research. And it was just a pleasure to be part of that. And I think we should enjoy these moments more often, and to assist where we can assist, I think is a great way also to feel more meaningful ourselves. And with that, I would like to conclude and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Markus, very much. It was very inspiring, thought-provoking, and I think it's maybe even difficult to deal with for some. So before we start the questions that we have regarding how we can change the things and what are your ideas on this, the first question that I would like to ask, that I like very much, do you, Markus, have examples of IHRM phenomena that are not addressed yet?
Not addressed yet. I don't think so. I think in the moment we are really spreading out and look, fortunately, to many different things. I try to show that with the various new actors that we look at, the various new activities. There's often, of course, now the danger to focus on, if I were now to name aspects that we should more look at, there's always the danger that we then speak about the research that we are just doing ourselves. So I would be reluctant to do that. But what I think matters in the search of topics that we should look at more, that we stay in our level of analysis. So, I mean, there's research on the societal level, and I think it would be very difficult now to switch and do now research on the team level. So those who do research on the societal level should stay on that level. Those who do research on the organizational level should stay on that level. It goes on, so we break it down to organizational units, headquarter subsidiary relations, teams, the individual. So wherever we work, I think we should stay on that level. There we feel comfortable. And on that level, we should be on the lookout for topics that are of relevance. And often, again, they don't come necessarily out of our own journal articles, but of more broader debates. And we should have also the courage then to link our research to these broader debates, and not to say, oh, this is too far away, that is too distant. I better quote the last article that came out about that topic in the journal that I want to publish in.
Okay, but to connect to this broader audience, so our participants, they do agree with you. Actually, nobody says that you are saying something which is like completely, and nonsense. This is great, but how do we practically do this? How do we do this revolution as you propose? How do you change things step by step? And do you think that, because there was another question, let's say, for example, the initiative from the IOM discoveries, is it for you a right step, into the right direction?
Yes, I think so. And I think we are taking now also steps in the right direction. So please don't get me wrong, like I'm criticizing the world around me and everything is wrong or so. No, I see already that we make steps in the right direction. We move a bit away from an extreme that we might have seen more like 5 or 10 years ago. But the key point in the end is the incentive system. Yeah. So we do what we are required to do. What are we required to do to get a PhD, to get tenure, to get full professorship? Well, if the focus is always exclusively on top journals, we will never write books. Or we will write books if we are close to retirement, where we have the luxury to do what we want to do. And that is, I would argue, the wrong direction. So I'm not saying that we should go from here to there, but that we should open up more venues of what is excellence in scholarship. So that can be these journal articles, that can be books and the like. And again, so just to make sorry, to finish that point, journals, I think, are already opening up, and that is a good development.
Okay, so one way for you is to also find other venues like the books. But then how we can, this is the question from Satish, how can we reform our own, this rotten, as he says, publish and perish system? Because actually the books are not recognized, and you are rightly saying that we are waiting for the retirement to write them. What would be the practical steps to, to change our own tenure, PhD systems, etc.?
It is difficult. So I think the first step is to engage in discourses around that, in debates. As I tried in this very moment, when we meet at conferences, when we speak to decision makers, and and what we need is, of course, the support of those who are showing excellence in the current system. We don't want a situation where the successful ones say they are saying that only because they don't get into the top journals, therefore they are whining about the system. So it will take the support of those who are leading scholars, and so we, again, through little discussions, through trying to bring into our journal publications aspects that we might not have done before. So there are only small steps possible from as many people as possible.
Yeah, so actually what you're doing is the calling for the help or the support from the leading, and this is a good venue. I hope so also, I completely agree. And many of us, by the way, in the organizing team, we are playing the role of either associate editors or other editors in different journals. And actually for me, it was very inspiring, and I will be changing from my side. As you said, it's maybe just individual steps, but actually it's very important just to be a bit more positive and not to stay on this negative touch. There is Hussein who is saying actually that all they tend to agree that more involvement in broader societal debates is still needed. In a way, research in such areas as inclusion and equality already addresses broader debates. What do you think about this?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the
inclusion and equality. So actually, the IHRM scholars, they speak about some phenomena, but he says, he mentions inclusion and equality, but there are others which are important. And I would say that in a way, it's not so negative. So we do take, well, I hope so, but, in the broader societal debates.
Of course, I was depicting, or a picture to bring in a point. Of course, as soon as we look closer and we bring in more nuance, of course, we see that inclusion is one aspect. Also take part in bigger debates. But at least, for example, in Germany, management is, so business studies is the most frequently studied area discipline at the university. So there are lots of business studies professors with lots of business studies students. And given the sheer number of scholarship that we have in our discipline, I would say we are not very much in these debates. Of course, we are, but by pure number, we should dominate, or we should have a much louder voice than we have. And I would argue that this does not even count that much for us, because again, we are in our inner circles. I mean, I tried also to write an article myself, I think last year, in the Zeit, a German news paper, a weekly one. And it was my article was about cosmopolitans, and I was very proud of it. And I got also help from a journalist making my article less academic, more accessible to the readers of a newspaper. But I miserably failed, and I couldn't get it into the site, and none of the other top newspapers in Germany. So I saw how difficult that is, and that reminded me of Mark Mendenhall with his weekly column that he had in Chattanooga newspaper. So that his local one, and I had a lot of respect, or even more respect now, to see how difficult it is. But again, that's not something that we usually do, because it doesn't matter to us as much.
Yeah, so how can we do this? This is another question, and this is the last question because we don't have time. Marcus, by the way, if you can stop sharing, it could be maybe better for the audience to see your face. Yeah, what can scholars, this is a question from Agnes, proactively do to increase engagements between theory and practice? Because a lot of scholarship had been done with minimal intervention of policy agents, which then has limited visibility of scholarly writing. That is exactly, to continue on your last point.
Sorry, I was a bit now distracted with my
stop
screen.
Sharing
so
thing.
Yeah.
How can we increase this link between theory and practice? Yeah. Exactly what you were saying. Yeah.
So again, I mean, I would not argue that theory is not relevant anymore or so. Yeah. First of all, so there are various points. First of all, I would say also description can matter and should matter. If we describe a new phenomena that we have seen, that should be also something that should be of relevance and also enough, so to speak, to enter a top journal, as is also the case with finance, accounting, and other areas, marketing. So why are we not allowing for that? And if it gets now to the inclusion of theory, so let us look how we can integrate, again, these, I would say, very much fragmented research that we do with fragmented theories, because we are always forced to create new theories. So let us bring things together again and go out with then hopefully more substantial theories out to that audience that is beyond our small area.
Okay, I'm very sorry that I couldn't ask. Thank you, Marcus, very much for being able to ask all questions, but we are running out of time. And just to conclude, I would like to repeat again that this talk is a part of series, and the next one is scheduled in September. We don't have a exact date yet, but it will be with Chris Brewster as a guest speaker. So watch out for the information. And I would like to say a big thank you to Marcus. Thank you very much for accepting this talk and to come and to provoke these different thoughts. To all colleagues who are involved in organizing this webinar, and of course to all participants. We hope you found this interesting and useful, and hope to see you in September after a break. Thank you very much all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.